everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and happy Jane Austen July. I am so thrilled to be participating in this, my, I suppose, third Jane Austen July. It's the second one I am participating in fully. And so I'm here today to tell you about some of the books that I hope to read. Now, I have a lot of books that could fit all of these challenges. So what I've done is I've divided them into books I definitely want to read, my limbo pile, aka books from the library or books that I have on order, and then my other pile of possibilities that I might get to if I have the time. So first of all, let's talk about the challenges. The first challenge is to read one of Jane Austen's full-length novels, and the group read for this year is Pride and Prejudice. I don't need to tell you what this is about, do I? It's her most famous and one of my favorites, so I'm thrilled to reread it, especially in this Wordsworth edition with the Thompson illustrations, including, where is it? Including this of Mr. Collins protesting that, oh no, I never read novels. I just love the look on his face. The second challenge is to read one of Jane Austen's shorter works, and for this the group read is Lady Susan, which I also have here. I haven't read this one since college, so it's going to be really fun to read it, and it's also going to be fun to see if this edition also has Thompson illustrations. I know he illustrated her full-length novels. I don't know if anyone ever illustrated the shorter works. So I'm intrigued to find out. A third challenge is to read a book written by one of Jane Austen's contemporaries. I usually stretch this prompt as well to say a book that was written either within Jane Austen's lifetime or one that she might have read herself. So sometime within the 18th century. So for this, I have three potential choices that I really want to get to. The first is The Beau's Stratagem by George Farquhar. This is a play from the earlier half of the 1700s, I think. And it's your standard romantic comedy of men trying to get the girls they want, but of course with many obstacles thrown in their way, and many witty 18th century asides. I know this was done by the National Theatre a few years ago, and I never got to see it, so I am really intrigued to read it at some point. And I'm sure it might have also been in production when Jane Austen was alive, and she might have been able to see it herself. Also a book that I do believe actually influenced Jane Austen. I do believe she is mentioned somewhere within Austen's work, and that is Eliza Haywood. So I have here Love in Excess, which I think is one of her novels. She wrote both plays and novels, but I'm pretty sure this is a novel. This is again from the earlier half of the 18th century, I want to say the 1740s. And I quite like the description on the back. I don't think this gives too much away, which is rare for a rare classic. So I'm just going to read that to you. It says, "Two wealthy young women compete for the love of one man. According to the customs of their time, Alavisa and Amina must passively await a marriage proposal from Delmont. When an attempt to anonymously seduce her beau leads him to Amina's doorstep, Alavisa turns to subterfuge to win him over." And that sounds wonderful, and it's fairly small, very accessible. I would like to read this. And I am also so pleased to have found this book. This is one that we know Jane Austen probably read because it is referenced in Emma, and that is The Romance of the Forest by Anne Radcliffe, which I never realized was a Mrs. Radcliffe novel, but it is the book that Harriet Smith recommends that Robert Martin read early on in Emma. So I am really intrigued to read it. I have absolutely no idea what it's about. Since Anne Radcliffe wrote it, I'm assuming it's a Gothic novel of some sort. I think it takes place in France, And that's really all I know, but I'm really excited to read this and finally understand what sort of books Harriet Smith liked to read. Another challenge is to read nonfiction, either about Jane Austen or about the time that she lived in. And here again, I have two potential choices. The first is The Beau Monde by Hannah Grieg, which I have been wanting to read for over a decade now. Hannah Grieg is a major 18th century and Regency scholar, and this is her book about the upper crust of Regency society at the time. And I don't need to know much more than that. This sounds wonderful. I'm especially interested in this as Hannah Grieg is listed as one of the historical consultants on Bridgerton, which deals with the upper crust of Regency society. However, I didn't see much evidence of that within the show, given how many major historical errors were going on. So I would be intrigued to see this book to see if indeed they actually paid attention to anything she said, or whether they consulted her and then promptly ignored her and did whatever they wanted. Another nonfiction book that I'm really excited to read is Harriet Wilson's memoirs, which are the memoirs of Harriet Wilson, who is supposedly the greatest courtesan of her age. And these were edited by Leslie Blanch. I had not heard of Harriet Wilson until I watched the one-man show Being Mr. Wickham, in which Adrian Lucas revisits his role as Wickham, and he was Wickham in the 1995 Pride and Prejudice. He revisits Wickham as an older man, as he himself was getting older, and Wickham talks to you and tells you his life story, albeit in a very skewed way. You can't trust anything Wickham tells you. And he claims to have met Harriet Wilson, and that he would have succeeded with her had Lord Byron not walked in. And that was the first I had heard of her, so I was thrilled to see that I could still pick up a copy of these memoirs to find out more about her. Because apparently she was a huge deal, but I've never heard of her, so I need to find out more. And next is to read a book either based on a Jane Austen novel or that takes place within the Regency. So for that I have chosen Pandora by Susan Stokes Chapman, because this takes place in 1799. So squarely within the Regency there, or at least squarely within Austen's lifetime. So I feel quite safe reading this. I haven't decided if this is truly historical fiction or if it's historical fiction that retells the myth of Pandora and Pandora's box. And I kind of don't want to know more than that until I actually go in and read it. For an Austen retelling, I also have on order Godmersham Park by Jill Hornby, which is not a retelling of an Austen novel, but it is a retelling of some aspects of the Austens' lives. This, I think, looks at their friend Anne Sharp and her life as a governess. So I'm counting that. I think we can skew that challenge a little bit and make it work. So now for my other limbo books, and these are books that I do not have physical copies of. I either have them on Kindle or I can borrow them digitally through my library. So the first of those is Covent Garden Ladies by Hallie Rubenhold, and this is a biography of the Covent Garden Ladies. There was a list made of all of the prostitutes who worked in the Covent Garden area during the 18th century and kind of made public where they lived, what their specialities were. And so Hallie Rubenhold, much like she did in The Five, takes that and looks into these women themselves, as well as the effect that this list had on the wider community and on these women. I could also borrow The Time Traveler's Guide to Regency Britain by Mortimer, I want to say. He has a whole series of these, Time Traveler's Guide to various eras in British history, so I could read the one on the Regency now that it exists. I've heard wonderful things about the series, and I think my mom read this one recently and really enjoyed it. I could also borrow The Particular Charm of Miss Jane Austen by Ada Bright and Cass Grafton, which is apparently part of a series, so I'm intrigued by this. This sounds wonderful, and I'm going to read you just the tagline from Goodreads because this sells it to me. When a time-traveling Jane Austen gets stuck in modern-day Bath, it's up to avid Janeite Rose Wallace to save her, because she's the only one who knows that Jane exists. That sounds so awesome. It sounds like everything I wanted the Confessions of a Jane Austen Addict series to be. It's everything I wanted Lost in Austen to turn into, that it never quite did. So I may really borrow this audiobook because that sounds amazing. I also have 2 of Fanny Burney's novels on Kindle because they were free on the Kindle app, and those are Cecilia and Camilla. That is all I know about them. I think it's best to go into those completely blindly. I did enjoy Evelina when I read it in university, so I would be intrigued to read these too. I also have this pile of possibilities of other books that I might end up getting to in the month of July, should I find myself with the time. The first is Burning Bright by Tracy Chevalier, and this is her historical fiction look at 2 young children who end up befriending their neighbor, William Blake, who was, of course, a poet within Jane Austen's lifetime. So that sounds wonderful. Been meaning to read that for years and years. I also have Rob Roy by Sir Walter Scott, which was written in 1817, so it just squeezes into the Austen's lifetime category. And this is his retelling or reimagining of the life of the Scottish outlaw, Rob Roy MacGregor, who supposedly I am related to. I have found 0 evidence of this on Ancestry.com, but according to family lore, we come from the MacGregors. I also have Johnson and Boswell's A Journey Through the Western Islands of Scotland, which are Boswell's journals of his trip through the Western Islands of Scotland with Dr. Samuel Johnson, which I forget when exactly they took this trip, but it's either within Austen's lifetime or it was close enough to her lifetime that she probably would have read this at some point. I also have The Foundling by Stacey Halls, which takes place in 1745, so Georgian, sort of counts. And this tells the story of a young woman who is forced to give up her child to the Foundlings Hospital, and then years later, when she can afford to keep her, goes back to pick her up and discovers that she has been adopted by another family. And it is the story of her work to try and track down her missing child. I also have this delightful book, Jane Austen in Bath, Walking Tours of the Writer's City by Catherine Reeve. And these are just illustrated maps and stories about a variety of walks throughout Bath that Jane Austen probably would have gone on. So for example, Sydney Gardens, which I lived nearby when I went to Bath for Christmas a few years ago. And yes, the canals still kind of look like that. So I'm really intrigued to look through this and see how much of Bath I can still recognize. I also want to set myself the challenge of working through some of these. These are Pride and Prejudice and Puzzles, which are all sorts of puzzles, crosswords, word searches, logic puzzles, based around Austen's novels. So I want to set myself the challenge of photocopying one of these every day, because I don't want to write in the book. I want to be able to reuse these puzzles in the future, and solving one. So we'll see if I actually follow through on that, but I hope to. I also have Jane Austen's England by Roy and Leslie Adkins, which has shown up on almost every Jane Austen July TBR so far. I hear it is wonderful, and it is very much what it sounds like, a look at Regency England and the England that Austen would have known through a variety of different lenses. I also have some cookbooks that I hope to experiment with at some point, and those are Tea with Jane Austen by Kim Wilson and Jane Austen's Table by Robert Tousley Anderson. Now, these are going to take some doing because A, I don't tend to read cookbooks cover to cover like I would a novel. And B, I also have a number of food allergies, which make cooking, especially baking, very difficult, especially Regency food. I know from watching a number of documentaries that a lot of Regency food involved either shellfish, nuts, or cream, all of which I'm allergic to. So I need to read through these very carefully to see if there are any recipes that I can adapt to foods that I can eat. And if I can, I will try and make a video of me making these treats and letting you know how they turn out and how I've adapted them so that they are allergy friendly for me. And then lastly, a discarded library book that my mother brought home for me years ago and I still have not read is this biography of Fanny Burney by Claire Harmon. And I really need to get to this at some point because Claire Harmon is a wonderful biographer. I loved her biography of Jane Austen. I know she's done a wonderful biography of Charlotte Bronte and I believe of Charles Dickens as well. So I would love to read this, but I've always felt like I needed to have read more of Fanny Burney's work before I get to this. So I probably won't get to this year, but I'm putting it on my pile of possibilities just in case. And there you have it. There are probably more books in my nonfiction bin that I could have dragged up. I have a biography of George IV that I could have pulled up, who was the Prince Regent at the time. I also have The Courtiers by Lucy Worsley, which looks at the early Georgian period. But I think this is enough to be going on with. So let me know what you are planning on reading for this Jane Austen July. And if you are looking for other recommendations for some of these prompts, I will link down below my shelf tours for all of my Jane Austen based fiction and nonfiction books, so you can have a look through those for some more ideas. And until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.